This file, from September of 1996, brings us to the secluded valleys of Gunpowder State Park, Maryland, where a group of teens discovered that some places are best left unexplored. Not just once, but twice. You're browsing the Cryptid Archives, narrative short stories based on real cryptid encounters, presented by Cryptids Across the Atlas. The Thing in Gunpowder Valley. I used to think the scariest things in Maryland were the local cops who'd chase us from parking lot to parking lot, treating bored teenagers like hardened criminals. That changed in September of '96, when 8 of us learned that some places hold secrets darker than small-town politics and teenage rebellion. But it wasn't just that first night that haunts me. It was our stupid, reckless decision to go back. Growing up in Hartford County, we learned all the local hangouts. Those hidden pockets where young people could gather without drawing too much attention. We had a whole circuit. The McDonald's parking lot until the manager called the cops. The empty lot behind the mall until security ran us off. And finally, when we'd exhausted our urban options, the Lodges. The Lodges wasn't its real name. Officially, it was just another corner of Gunpowder State Park. But generations of local kids had given it that nickname. Maybe because of the crude shelters we'd sometimes find in the woods. Strange lean-tos made of broken branches and scattered leaves. We never knew who built them, and we never really asked. That September night started like any other. There were 8 of us in 4 cars, gathered first at the McDonald's until the inevitable police cruiser made its appearance. I was driving my '87 Mustang. Not exactly cherry condition, but it was freedom on wheels. Tom had his '68 Classic that he'd rebuilt with his dad. Brian was in his beat-up Dodge Omni, and Caitlin had her mom's Honda. The others, Jason, Mike, Sarah, and Chris, were spread out somewhere between our vehicles. The temperature had dropped unusually low for early September, hovering around 40 degrees, when we made our way up to the lodges around 10 p.m. The spot was perfect if you knew how to find it. Take I-95 to Route 152, head north past where civilization starts thinning out, then navigate a maze of increasingly rural roads until you hit Bottom Road. The pull-off was right at the sharp bend, with the Gunpowder River curving behind us and a steep, tree-covered hill rising in front. But the bare description doesn't capture the otherworldly quality of this place. The hill wasn't just steep, it was nearly vertical in spots, rising 3 feet for every 2 feet of horizontal distance. Old trees clung to its face, their roots exposed like grasping fingers where erosion had stripped away the soil. A cut embankment about 5 feet high separated the road from the slope proper, creating a natural barrier that made the spot feel sheltered and hidden from the world. Behind us, massive boulders dotted the space between the road and river, silent sentinels that had witnessed countless teenage gatherings. A stony beach stretched about 100 feet along the water's edge, decorated with cans and initials carved into tree trunks, the signatures of those who'd come before us. We arranged our cars in the usual formation, headlights off, facing the slope. The moon was half full that night, its light diffused by high clouds casting just enough illumination to make out the tree line about 50 feet up. A light mist rose from the river, curling around our vehicles like spectral fingers reaching for warmth. Some of our group had been out trying to do things they probably shouldn't, but Tom, Jason, and I, we were sober. I remember that detail clearly because later, when we tried to make sense of what happened, it became important. Now, you can dismiss one person's testimony, explain away a teenager's ignorance in a wild story, but 3 clear-headed witnesses? That's harder to rationalize. The hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. passed in that strange way they do when you're young. Too fast and too slow, all at once. We talked about the usual things: who was dating who, whose car was faster, plans for Halloween. The conversation would ebb and flow, punctuated by long, comfortable silences where we just existed in each other's company. Looking back, I actually wonder if we sensed something watching us during those hours. The woods seemed to lean in around us, and occasionally, one of us would stop mid-sentence, head tilted as if listening for something just beyond hearing. Around 2:30 a.m., that nebulous tension crystallized into sound. At first, it was easily dismissible, something moving through the underbrush up the slope. But the rhythm was wrong for a deer, wrong for anything that should have been in those woods. Then came the crash. The noise exploded through our casual conversations. The unmistakable sound of something large careening down the steep hillside. We could hear branches snapping, loose gravel cascading, and what sounded disturbingly like hands grasping for purchase on the unstable slope. The sound painted a vivid picture of controlled chaos, of something massive trying to manage an intentional descent down an almost vertical incline. I was looking down when it happened, probably checking the time or fiddling with the radio. Another detail that would later haunt me, those precious seconds of observation lost to mundane distraction. It was Tom's voice that snapped my attention upward, his words cutting through the night with crystal clarity. Holy crap! There, illuminated by the ambient moonlight and the ghostly mist rising from the river, stood a figure that defied explanation. It had landed on the road in a crouch, a position that somehow made its true height even more apparent. As Brian and I instinctively hit our headlight switches, the creature straightened and turned to look right at us. Time seemed to stretch like taffy in that moment. Even through the haze of mist and adrenaline, certain details burned themselves into my memory. The figure was enormous, its height dwarfing any human I'd ever encountered. 8 feet tall at minimum, with proportions that spoke of raw power and inhuman grace. Its form was undeniably humanoid, but there was nothing human about the way this thing moved. As our headlights flooded the scene, the creature sprang into motion. Its sprint was otherworldly, powerful legs eating up distance with impossible speed. The sound of its bare feet slapping against the asphalt echoed through the valley, a rhythm that would revisit me in countless nightmares to come. Every thwap of its feet hitting the ground, sending chills down my spine. 3 of us, Tom, Brian, and myself, found the courage to exit our vehicles. We took a few hesitant steps up the road, following in the direction the creature had fled. The air felt charged, as if we'd wandered into an electrical field. That sensation, more than anything else, convinced me we'd encountered something beyond the ordinary realm of explanation. We stood there in silence, none of us willing to be the first to put words to what we'd witnessed. After about 10 minutes, we all seemed to reach the same unspoken conclusion. With mumbled excuses about the late hour and fatigue, we departed, our headlights cutting through the mist as we returned to the familiar comfort of civilization. For almost a year, none of us spoke about what we'd seen. Now, we still hung out, still cruised the same spots, but the lodges became conspicuously absent from our rotation. Some of the group drifted apart, the way people do after high school, but those of us who stayed close carried a shared weight, an unspoken understanding that the world was bigger and stranger than we'd been raised to believe. And the story might have ended there. Another local legend, another tale to eventually dismiss as the product of teenage imagination. But that winter, reports started emerging from nearby Kingsville. Something had been seen moving through the suburban backyards, leaving massive tracks in the fresh snow. The local news ran several segments about possible Bigfoot sightings, treating it with that mixture of skepticism and sensationalism that characterized small-town journalism. We followed these reports with intense private interest, though none of us admitted why. Each new sighting, each unexplained track seemed to validate our experience, but it also awakened something else, a dangerous curiosity about what we'd really seen that night. That's what led four of us, myself, Tom, Jason, and Sarah, to make our second mistake. It was almost exactly a year later, another crisp September night. We'd been drinking coffee at the local diner, discussing the latest Bigfoot article in the weekly paper. Maybe it was the caffeine, maybe it was the false courage that comes with time and distance from trauma. Maybe it was just simple human stupidity. But someone, I think it was Sarah, suggested we go back. The lodges looked different in the amber glow of sunset. We'd deliberately arrived earlier this time, telling ourselves we were being smart, being scientific. We had a camcorder borrowed from Tom's parents, a couple of disposable cameras, even a tape recorder. We were going to document everything, prove to ourselves and others what we had seen. The river burbled peacefully behind us as we parked in our old spot. The steep hillside looked less threatening in the fading daylight, though shadows were already gathering thick between the trees. We set up our equipment with the methodical focus of people trying very hard to appear competent and unafraid. As darkness fell, the familiar mist began rising from the river. The temperature dropped, and that old, heavy silence settled over us. We kept the camcorder running, passing it between us as we narrated our surroundings, our memories of the previous year, our theories about what we'd seen. Around midnight, we heard the first tree snap. It came from high up the slope, a sharp crack that echoed through the valley. Then another, closer, and another. Something was moving parallel to the road, just out of sight in the darkness, breaking branches that would have been too thick to break. Sarah was filming when the first rock hit the roof of Tom's Mustang. Not thrown, dropped from somewhere above us on the slope. The impact left a perfect dent in the metal, and Tom's curse of surprise was captured clearly on the video. Then, another rock came, larger this time, landing with a heavy thud in the road between our cars. We could hear movement on the hillside, see the shadows shifting in ways that shadows shouldn't move. The air grew thick with that same electric charge I remembered from the year before. That's when we made our third mistake. We turned on our headlights. Multiple figures stood on the slope above us. 3 that I could count clearly, though the shadows suggested more. They were positioned at different heights up the hillside, some partially hidden behind trees, others fully exposed. All of them wrong in ways that the human mind struggles to process. The creature we had seen the previous year had been glimpsed in a moment of chaos and movement. These were still, watching, waiting. Their stillness was somehow worse than movement would have been. An unnatural patience that showed us that they had a plan. One of them shifted slightly, and in that moment, I understood something that turned my blood to ice. They weren't just watching us. They were hunting us. I don't remember who screamed first. I don't remember starting my car. I do remember the sound of feet, many feet, that same slapping sound against the asphalt as we peeled out of that pull-off. In the rearview mirror, I caught a final glimpse of dark shapes moving with abnormally fast speed down that near vertical slope. And we didn't stop until we reached the highway, and even then, only long enough to make sure everyone was okay. The camcorder, it was gone. Sarah dropped it somewhere between seeing the figures and reaching the cars. One of the disposable cameras had fallen under a seat, its film unexposed. The other was missing entirely. Later that week, a local paper ran a small story about strange sounds reported in Gunpowder State Park. The article mentioned how several hikers had found unusual structures in the woods, crude shelters made of broken branches and scattered leaves. The kind of structures that had given the lodges its nickname all those years ago. Some of us still live in this area. Tom moved away after college, but the rest of us see each other occasionally. We don't talk about those nights anymore. Not directly, anyway. But sometimes when the conversation lulls and the night grows quiet, I catch them glancing toward the dark places between streetlights. I see them tense at unexpected sounds, their heads turning slightly, as if listening for that distinctive slap of bare feet on asphalt. Because we learned something in Gunpowder Valley, something that changed us forever. Some places are quiet and distant for a reason. Some mysteries are better left unexplored. And sometimes, when something lets you walk away once, you should be wise enough not to go back. This short story was based on an encounter originally documented by the BFRO. Links to the original encounter, along with all our other cryptid content, can be found below. And what do you make about the dramatic shift in behavior between the first and second encounters? In the initial sighting, a single creature seemed almost indifferent to the witnesses, while the return visit revealed multiple beings displaying what appeared to be coordinated hunting behavior. If those were genuine encounters, could the teenager's return have been interpreted as a challenge or territorial invasion? Or is there perhaps a more mundane explanation for why the second visit proved so much more threatening than the first? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're there, don't forget to hit that follow button. And if you enjoyed this encounter, please consider leaving an honest review. It helps other cryptid enthusiasts find these stories of the unexplained. And always remember to keep your eyes open. You never know what you might see just on the edge of the road.